Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again today, and welcome back to Dominions 5 Basic Nation Analysis. This is another video for Pendragon9123, so thank you so much, dude, for your continued support of the channel. So today we're going to talk about Bogarus, the Age of Heroes. Now, I'm not doing this in the way that I normally do Basic Nation Analyses lately, and also, I do have to say, the fact that so many people have requested Basic Nation Analyses probably means I'm not doing enough of them, so I do want to get back on that wagon, especially as the number of games I'm in sort of trends downward. But anyway, I'm not doing this in the normal way where I have like a year's worth of expansion and then I show that off and talk about it, and the reason for that is I don't think showing off a year's worth of Bogarusian expansion is particularly useful because Bogarus is shit at expansion. It's just really bad. They don't have the tools that good expander, like strong early game nations need. Basically, Bogarus has a garbage early game and then a very, very powerful late game, so let's talk about why that is. So, Bogarus, cold resistance, prefers cold +2. They have heavy cavalry, mounted archers, and infantry, otherwise unspecified. That's about correct. For magic, however, they have a lot of flexibility in terms of magic, and summonable beings of earlier eras. We'll talk about that as well. Strong priests, standard forts, but for late age, which means they can get citadels. So, for commanders, you've got a Bogarusian scout, both survivals, cold resistance 5, and snow move. Almost all Bogarusian units have snow move, which is useful. The Voivod is the basic infantry commander, 60 leadership, cheap. The Knyaz is the higher level commander. He is inspirational and has 80 leadership. So this guy's pretty solid, especially because he still only costs 1 recruitment point. Has cold resistance, doesn't have snow move, but does have map move 20. So you're not really going to get slowed down. And 80 leadership, inspirational, pretty solid. Good guy to have around. The Veliki Knyaz is inspirational and has 120 leadership, but costs 2 recruitment points. So that's kind of a trade-off for him. In the late age where you have citadels, you can make this choice a lot more than you could in the earlier Middle Ages where you don't have citadels. But, you know, you can use these guys for that +3 morale they give you and the large amounts of leadership, which is pretty good. Then you've got the Skopets, who is your sacred commander. And the Skopets and we'll talk about the Chlisti as well. Skopets and Chlisti are your only sacred units that you can recruit as Bogarus. The Skopets is not too expensive, garbage stats, except for very high morale, 40 leadership, stealthy, snow move, and causes unrest, causes 2 unrest, 20% chance of blood magic. So for 70 gold, 20% chance of blood 1, okay. He's holy 1. Overall, he's not really exceptional. In fact, he's very unexceptional in terms of stats. Like, his attack is garbage, his HP and is garbage, his prot is literally 0. And this is a lot like the Chlisti in general as well. He does cause unrest and is stealthy, so there is kind of a niche use for him that way. The Chlisti, the troop sacred, is basically the same thing. They're extremely cheap. I believe they're the cheapest sacred unit in the game. Except for the ones who are free spawn, which of course have a cost of 0 technically. They're garbage because I mean they're just garbage in terms of stats. They're absolutely awful. They're worse than militia. They have 0 protection. The only thing they have going for them is that they have higher than average morale, and it's not even like really crazy, incredibly high morale. It's just high morale. Their strength is low. Their attacks and defense is low. Their combat speed is unexceptional. Their prot is 0. They do have snow move, they are stealthy, and they all cause unrest, however. So, if you have temples, and you can build Chlisti, you can, if you want, churn out a whole bunch of them and sneak them into enemy territories to cause crippling levels of unrest. I mean, it could work, I guess. But really, Chlisti are hard to use. If for some reason you took a really, really heavy bless, you could use huge numbers of Chlisti and divine bless them, I guess, but it's hard to think of a bless that would make these guys efficient. They don't have flails, so they don't get 2 attacks like flagellants do. So they don't even really hit out of their weight class. They have these morning stars. They do get an attack bonus versus shields, but they're just not very impressive. Their attack skill is garbage because of the morning stars. Anyway, Chlisti are very interesting, but I wouldn't say they're very good. Because their stats are just so low that it's like they just die. I mean, they die to anything. Absolutely anything. Interesting thing about Bogarus. Bogarus has recruitable Holy 2s, the Exarchs, and then they also have Eparchs, who are capital only. They're Holy 3 recruitable, and they are, I think, the only recruitable Holy 3 that only requires 2 recruitment points, except for Nazca's Royal Malkis, which of course cost 850 gold. So Eparchs are actually pretty handy, because it means that you have instant access to Divine Blessing at all times, and you have plenty of throne claimants as Bogarus. So there is that. You also, as Bogarus, have a very large and diverse lineup of mages. So this is kind of where the power of Bogarus lies. Start off with Occultists, 100 gold. They are old, almost all of your mages are. Astral Death and Blood 1. This is a fantastic mage. Occultists are great. You can communion them up, they can cast high-level blood astral spells, they can spam Horde of Skeletons, they can do all sorts of crazy shit. Occultists are fantastic mages. Calendologists, next. Astral 2 for 105 gold, plus Fortune Teller 10, so they can prevent bad events. Very, very solid. Having a few in every fort is an excellent investment, especially if you took Misfortune. Alchemists. Alchemists are basically independent magi, but they cost 50 gold more. But still, for 135 gold for Fire, Earth, and Astral, that's worthwhile. Like, that's a valuable investment, especially because these alchemists can, of course, communion up with all the rest of your mages and cast high-level earth buffs, high-level fire spells, high-level astral spells. They're good guys. They also have Alchemist 50, which isn't terribly relevant because you normally don't do this, but they can do that. And there are there's one in particular of your Ruse-specific summons that alchemists can cast for you, which can be kind of hilariously valuable. We'll talk about that in a second. The Masters of Names are incredibly good researchers. Now, they're not super efficient comparatively because they're not sacred, but still, 155 gold for 17 research points. The important thing about that is that Masters of Names research is really, really fast. So if you have the gold to buy them, now their upkeep isn't out of line. I mean, it's 124 gold a year, which works out to about, this is 10 gold per turn. 10 gold per turn for 17 research points, that's fine. If you can afford to churn these guys out of 3 or 4 forts, your research will skyrocket. They're effectively most other people's basic mages holding an air quill, except they don't need the air quill. If you give them an air quill, they're even better. So Masters of Names, a little bit less flexible, but they do have that 100% fire, air, or blood. So they're all still going to be combat effective and hugely good at research. The Masters of Names, the Astropelagists I managed to skip. Just because they're all variations on, they're just recolored old hooded men. Astropelagists are fantastic combat mages. They have Fortune Teller, albeit only Fortune Teller 5. They cost 125 gold for Air 2, Astral 1. These are Thunderstrike mages. These are Air Elemental summoning mages. These are Fog Warriors casting mages. These are just generally great combat mages, and they're also okay at research. Plus, they have the Fortune Teller, so to be honest, if you're willing to spend a couple extra gold, 20 extra gold per mage, you can actually skip Calendologists and just spam out Astropelagists without really caring, because, I mean, it's a lower Fortune Teller value, but still, if you have 10 or 15 of these guys piled up in a fort researching, they're more likely than not to stop any bad events cold. So, those are your Recruit Anywhere mages, and they're all really good. They're actually all excellent mages. Probably the Astropelagist is the most obviously powerful of them, at least early on, but the Occultist is a relatively efficient blood hunter as well as an excellent combat mage. The Master of Names is a great researcher as well as a relatively effective combat mage. The Calendologist can boost up to have high-level astral stuff really, really easily, and none of them are very expensive. The most expensive is the Master of Names at 155. That's very, very solid. An excellent mage lineup. On top of that, you have the Fivefold Angel. The Fivefold Angel is an upgraded Holy Commander, Leadership 80, Blood 2. So you have a base Blood 2 mage. He comes with garbage stats and a stump attack because he's cut off his own hands, but he also has damage reversal. And he's a spy, and he causes a ton of unrest. So there's lots of kind of value in the Fivefold Angels. Now, that said, he is expensive. He's 225 gold, and he does cause actually quite a bit of unrest. So you don't really want to have them just hanging around much. They are useful. I would say you only want to recruit fivefold angels for specific purposes, and generally speaking, having a base blood 2 isn't super valuable from the fivefold angel, especially because you can still get that from the starets. The startsi is I think the way you would pluralize that in Russian. Startsi are slow to recruit, but they're not expensive for a slow to recruit capital-only mage. They have tons of research points, so they're actually still relatively efficient researchers. And they have fantastic paths. Fire, air, astral, blood, plus a random that can include death. Sign me the fuck up. And these guys, look, you can easily use these guys to forge skulls of fire. You can use these guys can be air 2, they can be blood 2, they can be astral 3. A small percentage of them will be fire 3. If you happen to get a fire 3 one, then you can use another one to forge a skull of fire, put that on the fire 3 guy, who you'll have to recruit an average of like 30 of them or more in order to get one, but if you do, then you do. So sometime in the later game, you can ramp that guy up to fire 5 by forging boosters. Startsi are just really valuable. They're extremely potent mages. Now, they are quite old, but, for blood mages, being old isn't as big a problem because you can just eat a few, blood slaves and get younger. Which is horrendous, obviously, but very useful. So you've got, as Bogarus, you've got all these mages that are actually really powerful. You can break into blood very easily with your occultists, your startsi, and your fivefold angels, and even skopets if you're recruiting skopets, which you might be. You can do all sorts of crazy shit with these guys. By the mid-game, as magic kind of comes into its own and begins to become dominant, Bogarus is incredibly powerful. You can break out, and especially because you're hard to predict, because you could break out a bunch of alchemists and cast a lot of earth magic. You could break out a ton of astropelagists and summon air elementals and drop thunderstrikes. You could roll out the Masters of Names with the blood and air, or you can do all kinds of things. You can break out just a ton of occultists and cast Horde of Skeletons a million times. You can bring Startsi and do, literally all of that. So you've got a ton of options. It's hard to predict and counter-build against Bogarus's magic. Unfortunately, everything below the units line is kind of pretty fucking sad. And this is Bogarus's big weakness. So, you got the Voi. The Voi are militia. They are not good. Voi Spearmen, especially for the late age, this is like an early age militia unit. He's got a javelin. That's the best thing you can say about him. His stats are bad, his morale is bad, everything is average or below. You've got Voi Axemen, which are just terrible. And you've got Voi Archers, which are basic shortbow archers that in the late age are really kind of not good anymore. You can drop flaming arrows on them, and with flaming arrows they can be minimally useful. You can cast flaming arrows and wind guide both out of your communion pretty trivially. So you can mass Voi Archers and do some damage with them. But generally speaking, they're kind of low stat. I mean, they're comparable to like Healet Archers that Phlegra has. Which isn't a great thing, because Healet Archers are slaves, and so are a lot more efficient than Voi Archers in terms of upkeep. You've got the Klistli. This looks like it's pronounced Klistli, or Klist. In Russian, you would pronounce the word that this is a transliteration of Chlist, and then Chlistli is the plural version of it. Fun Russian lesson for today. In any case, we've talked about them. They're maybe situationally useful for causing unrest, but generally speaking, they don't really carry a bless well enough to want a hell bless, and you would need a hell bless to make them very useful. The Peshtsi are your basic infantry, and they are basically independent infantry. That's kind of what they are. Peshti Axemen, Peshtsi Spearmen, Peshtsi City Guard, they're probably the best out of all of them, I want to say. They have decent protection, not high protection, not for late age. They have decent protection and pretty good defense skill. And they also have a castle defense bonus. So there's that. But they're not good. They're possibly tolerable, but not good. Peshtsi Axemen, Not great. They don't have javelins or anything. They just have the axe attack, which is fairly low attack value. I mean, it does okay damage, but I don't think it's like the Peshti City Guard or what you'd be recruiting if you're recruiting infantry. You also have cavalry, and fortunately some of your cavalry is actually pretty decent. The Grid Druzhina are okay. They require 36 recruitment points, which is a little bit frustrating when you compare to, for example, Late Age Tianqi, which gets cavalry for 24 recruitment points, including heavy cavalry. But Grid Druzhina are not intolerably expensive. They have a composite bow attack that realistically doesn't matter all that much. They have the broadsword and the hoof, both of which are reasonably quality. They have 13 protection, which is well, not too terribly high, but they're okay. The Malaya Druzhina are the real deal. Malaya Druzhina are pretty good heavy cavalry. They've got high prot, attack and defense skill both decent, hit points both good, strength decent. They have a lance, they have the broadsword and the hoof attack. These guys can do some work. They're very comparable to Knights of the Tower. Slightly worse in terms of morale, especially, but also cheaper in terms of resources, and I believe also gold. Plus they have Bodyguard 3, so that can be very useful for your commanders. So Malaya Druzhina, solid units. Unfortunately, they're expensive. I mean, they're heavy cavalry. They cost 46 recruitment points. They are slow to mass up. So you have that. You also have some foreign recruitment units. You have the Black Hoods, which are like shitty light cavalry. They have composite bows, and honestly, these guys I probably would use as archers. They're not incredibly expensive. Like, they're cheap. They're very cheap as far as cavalry goes. Their performance in melee is god-awful because they have 10 prot, 12 defense skill, and a mace attack. They have very high combat speed, so you can potentially flank with them, but honestly, if I'm flanking for melee, I'm going to use Grid or Malaya Druzhina. I'm going to use the Druzhina for flanking. Black Hoods would just sit back and shoot arrows. They're a lot better than Voy Archers, both in terms of their precision and in terms of the damage they do. That said, they're also like twice as expensive. I mean, you can literally get, for the gold, 2 Voy Archers, and for the recruitment points, 4 Voy Archers for the price of 1 Black Hood. So, mass is probably the most important quality that an archer can have. So maybe if you're using Wind Guide, you can use that to compensate for lower numbers and make heavy use of Black Hoods. I'm not sure. They don't impress me at first look, especially because the helmet is good, but the leather hauberk is awful, and means their body prot is just garbage. They're going to be killed in any kind of exchange of fire. Like, you cannot use these guys to compete with crossbowmen, god no. The Stiagi have lances, which is nice, and they get the charge bonus for their first attack. So they're better than Black Hoods in melee, but also they still only have 1 melee attack. They don't have a hoof attack from their horses or anything, so their attack density is low, their protection is nothing to write home about. Yeah, Stiagi, maybe you get 1 or 2 per squad for the standard effect, but beyond that, I wouldn't really bother with them. So basically, you look over Bogarus's mage lineup, and it's excellent. It's really, really good, especially if you like communions. If you're good at managing communions, Bogarus is amazing for you, because every single mage they have is communionable. And then you look at their unit lineup, and you're like, ah, I see the problem. This is trash. The only non-trash units on this whole lineup are Malaya Druzhina, maybe Grid Druzhina, maybe Peshti City Guard. Beyond that, these are all just bad units. So, your early game... So, when you're playing as Bogarus in the late age, where independents are the hardest that they are of any era, your question as Bogarus is not, how successful can my early game be? Your question is, can I survive the early game to get to the point where I become powerful? Because the point that you become powerful does come pretty quick. So if we look real quick here, you have the Startsi from the Hall of Elders, Astral, Air, Fire, and then another Astral from the Grand Cathedral, which lets you recruit eparchs. None of your units are capital only. All of your units can be recruited anywhere you have the proper structures. In terms of god choices, fortunately, you have a lot of good god choices. Bogarus has options. Bogarus is one of the nations where I would say you absolutely must have an expander, because your early game is so weak. Your troops are very bad. You're not going to be making much progress with Hlisli, with your Sacreds. You have to do something to keep yourself in the game until your mages come online. So you need to expand. You don't have like another good option besides an expander. But fortunately, you have a lot of good expander options. You have the Svartalf Mastersmith, who can turn into a Lenormand. You have the Lenormand. You have the Ormer, which is a pretty solid expander choice. You've got the Son of Fenrir, which is a fairly solid expansion choice. You've even got the Virtue. And Virtue can expand pretty effectively, albeit it is expensive for the job. But, you know, it has all 5 and 25 prot against non-magical attacks, plus built-in shock and fire resist, so yeah, the Virtue can expand. If you can do, especially if you can, like, I don't know, honestly, you don't really need to do anything to it to let it expand, but especially if you give it some air magic and some kind of a blessing on it, then it can do really well. You've also got the Earth Serpent, albeit the Earth Serpent is overpriced these days. You have a collection of pretty cool titans, but you can't really afford to take them as Bogarus, because you have to expand. So, like, the Devies of the Sun, I would love to take on this nation because she's a gem gen. A fire gem gen is pretty valuable. And if this was Early Age Rus or even Vanarus, really, I would be strongly tempted. But Bogarus cannot afford, in my opinion, obviously all this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, but in my opinion, Bogarus can't afford to give up expansion to take a Titan. A lot of these chassis are kind of neat. They have cool things they can do, and like the Allfather chassis can potentially expand, maybe, with help, but not early and not fast. So you're gonna run into some problems if you take the Allfather even. Despite the fact you can kit the Allfather out pretty early in the game to serve as kind of an early game heavy thug / super combatant who can clear independent provinces. But he can't expand from the word jump, which is the problem. Similarly, you just can't afford these guys. I mean, you just can't. And it's terrible because Bogarus really wants scales. I mean, they really want a lot of money to churn out these mages, which are not sacred and so do cost quite a bit of upkeep. They really want production so they can churn out Malea Drugina, and Order for that matter, to maximize rec points. So as Bogarus, you would love, 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 love to have the opportunity to take, like, Irminsul with high scales. Like, you know, like Dormant Irminsul with, or even Imprisoned with almost no magic. Yeah, I would take something like this in a shot with Bogarus. But you just can't. I mean, if you take this, you'll be dead by turn 20. Assuming that your neighbors have any sense at all. Because Bogarus in the early game, very easy to kill. Bogarus in the late game, very, very scary. So, I would be looking at, honestly, I would probably be looking at the Svartalf Mastersmith. You can kind of rainbow him up a little bit while also being a decent expander, because the heavy armor in the late age doesn't protect people from dragon gas, and the fear is an excellent, excellent use for him. So, you could take him, you can give him like Earth 4, so that way he gets bonus prot from his Earth magic. You have more points to do something with. You need at least Dominion 4 or 5. But after that, you're going to have to start cutting scales. And it's sad, but it is what it is. Generally speaking, I would say, and this might sound weird, but definitely, I think you got to cut scales somewhere. You want to go cold 3. Just because it doesn't affect you some of the time, and it never affects you worse than 5%, so you might as well. I think you do want to go Misfortune, just because you have Fortune Tellers, and there's another reason as well that I'll talk about in a second. And you have to cut. You have to cut scales somewhere in order to get some kind of magic on this guy. I think you can also afford to take a point or two of Drain because you have the Masters of Names. And losing a point or two of research off each Master of Names doesn't hurt you that much, since it's, like, only a little over 5%. And in the capital, you can research with Startsi. And Startsi losing 1 or 2 points of research just don't care. I mean, 25 to 24 per Starts, it doesn't hurt you very much. So, with that, I think as Bogarus, probably a point or maybe 2 points of Drain is defensible. Ideally, I would love to take Magic 3 and just recruit nothing but Astropelagists at 14 research points per turn. but just given the points crunch, I don't think you can really afford that. So I think you probably end up with something like this. You want at least a little bit of production. But I think that's all you can afford to get, really. On top of that, you also kind of want blood on your god. Now, you can always empower in blood, but that can be kind of expensive. What you want is you want somebody with the blood death cross path. Now, you have occultists, but occultists are only death 1. And your goal as Bogarus has to be to ratchet up blood pretty hard and get to vampire lords and all that good stuff. So you can't get more than death 1 anywhere else. So death 3 or 4 on your god, probably a good idea. Blood on that god, probably also a good idea. Now here's the part that might get a little bit tricky. You have alchemists who have Earth 1 and Astral 1. You would like to have Earth 2, Astral 2 to forge crystal gear, which you don't have anywhere because Startsi don't get Earth. So you might want to take Astral 2 on this guy. Now, in his Lenormand form, that will be reduced to Astral 0, and so it won't be a problem in combat. In his Dwarf form, that does mean he'll have Astral 2, so worth keeping in mind. But a build like this, with just like a double Reinvigoration Bless or something stupid, I think this can work. This can give you some expansion. I've tested this a little bit. It can give you some expansion while also having, you know, the rainbow effect so you can do your forging and such. And it's not the worst. You can work with this, especially because the Svartalf Mastersmith does have, well, Mastersmith, so he can forge. So actually, yeah, with Mastersmith, you don't even necessarily need level 2. You can have just Astral 1. You do need Earth, you do need Death 3. And then you can cut that for another scale. So now you could either take only Drain 1, or you could go up to Production 2. Or perhaps Order 1, which would give you a little bit of unrest reduction and some more rec points. So something like this. This is neutral scales, which isn't bad. I think this or something like it is probably one of the best compromises you can come to. Other options, you could take the Son of Fenrir. Like I've said, the Son of Fenrir is actually a fairly decent expander, since he comes with Jotun Wolves, and he has Berserker +7. You don't really want to pay for a really good Bless for him, unfortunately, and without a really good Bless, he's quite fragile. Especially since he only has 1 attack. But yeah, I think personally, I think I would go Svartalf Mastersmith if I'm building a god for Bogarus. Because, as I said, your goal as Bogarus is survive the early game in good enough shape to start blood hunting and break out the battle magic. Speaking of magic, Bogarus has access to all of the Rus line summons. Now, many of them they can't use, but a lot of them they can, because you have all of that magic variety. So you can summon Simargles. Simargles are great patrollers. They have patrol strength +10, and they only cost 1 air gem each, so for patrolling, fantastic. They're also not magical, they're just animals, so anyone can lead them. You can summon Firebirds, and Firebirds have the interesting ability called Bringer of Fortune, I think, or Bringer of Luck. In any case, every Firebird has a 2% chance every turn to spawn a random good event, an event tagged as good, in that province, completely independent of scales. Luck, misfortune, whatever. So this is one reason why I say that as Bogarus you can probably afford to take Misfortune, even though I personally don't like Misfortune very much these days. But as Bogarus you have another source of good events. And so Firebirds cost 2 fire gems each. You're not really using fire gems for a whole lot else as Bogarus. So you can afford to pour fire gems into Firebirds. And on average, if you have 50 Firebirds in a province, which is 100 gems, but still, on average you'll get a good event every turn in that province, and some turns you'll get 2 or 3. Sometimes you'll get 0, of course, but, you know, I think, I haven't done a lot of math about it, I suspect that massing up a ton of Firebirds actually does pay for itself long term, if you can pull it off. I can't prove that, because as I said, it's not like I've done rigorous testing of this. But I suspect, because there are some good events give you tons of money and gems all in one great whack. Like, if your Firebirds spawn one of the, like, Lair of a Troll events or Great Treasure events that give you, like, 3,000 gold and 40 gems all in a pop, well, all of a sudden, they've pretty much paid for themselves, you know? And even if they just give you a steady flow of smaller good events, that's still really useful. So, that's interesting. It's not something to hang your hat on, necessarily, but it's interesting. You can contact Sirens. Sirens are seducers. They cost astral pearls who can fly. You can summon Alkonosts, who are high-level priests, who are inspirational commanders, who can fly. You can summon Lycos, who aren't very useful. Don't summon Lycos. Don't bother. It's a waste of death gems. You can summon Mages, who also aren't very useful because they're cold-blooded and don't have much prot and can't use their ranged attack in melee, so that's sad because they're really cool. Also, Dragon Mastery doesn't work on them for no reason. They don't have the tag that makes Dragon Mastery work. So, even though I would love to be able to summon 2 of these guys for 5 gems, and they would actually potentially be useful if you could summon 2 of them for 5 gems, you can't. Ever. So, they're not terribly useful because they're very slow to mass up, and not strong enough to justify spending 5 gems on. Sending Lady Midday is also a bad idea. Lady Midday is a fairly effective assassin. She's a lot like a disease demon, actually, but the problem is, disease demons cost 5 blood slaves, and Lady Midday costs 10 air gems. Now, to be fair, she's not a single use. She'll appear, and then you can use her to assassinate many times, but still, I don't think it's worth 10 air gems. You can send Gamayuns. Gamayuns have, prophecy and no astral magic, so they're pretty powerful. They are, this is, the same ability, Fortune Teller. And then they also have astral magic, so they're pretty good. For 25 pearls, flying astral mage, yes. Later on in the game, you can contact Cloud Velas, potentially, if you've ratcheted up to Air 4. Cloud Velas are quite powerful mages of air, and they can also heal. Mountain Velas you actually can't summon because you don't have any nature, but Mountain Velas are also quite powerful. And as are Leshies, although once again, you can't summon them. Leshies are powerful nature, earth, and I believe water, if I recall correctly, mages. But they have to be inside a forest in order to be as powerful as they can be. But so you've got all these cool national summons, many of which are quite useful. All of the astral, like, siren summons are really, really good. Zmays are potentially situationally good. Sirens, I already talked about them. Firebirds can be good if you have a bunch of fire gems to burn on them. It's a high investment, but once you've made that initial investment, I suspect they pay off. And Simargles are great for patrolling because you're a blood nation. And then, of course, since you're a blood nation, you have access to all this shit. You don't have any national blood spells, but honestly, if you have good astral blood crosspath access, which you do, you don't really need national blood spells. Because look, Startzi can be astral... Let's look at Startzi here. Startzi can be astral 3. 1 in 4 of them is astral 3. Blood boosters are easy to forge. You can forge astral boosters because you do have the astral earth crosspath on your alchemists, not on Masters of Names, just on the alchemists. So you can have a couple of alchemists, and you can have your god, the rainbow Master Smith that you got. You can forge crystal coins, you can forge Starshine skullcaps, you can forge earth boots. Once you've gotten an earth boot and a crystal booster on an alchemist, then he can forge everything you need. So you can boost astral up to 5. You can boost blood really easily. If you have astral 5 and high level blood, oh look, you can cast Dome of Corruption and Horror Seed and send horror. If you boost astral one more time, you can cast Astral Corruption, which is the fuck everyone else spell. As Bogarus, if you manage to get up to this level, you're in a really good spot. The trick is surviving to get up to that level. with your shit troops. So definitely as Bogarus, you have to have an Awake Expander. You have to have whatever production scales you can. I think, as I said, I think it's worth sacrificing Misfortune and probably Drain in order to get that. And once you've got that, a little bit of income, some extra resources, all of that, Malaya Druzhina are probably your best overall unit. Spamming out Peshtsi in an effort to kind of give yourself a chaff line isn't a bad idea, but to be honest, I would try to replace them with summoned chaff as rapidly as possible. You can ratchet up to Blood 2 pretty quickly and start throwing out Bone Fiends. You can spam Skeletons with Enchantment 5. There's a lot of ways you can go. For my money, your primary magical worry is surviving the early game. So your first question will be, who are my neighbors? Because your neighbors are likely to rush you, all of them, or any of them. And what do I need to stop them? So for example, let's say you landed next to Raga. You're fucked. You've lost. But we'll do our best, okay? If you've landed next to Raga, your best bet is probably to rush Conjuration. Because Conjuration will give you Air Elementals. Air Elementals can beat Jiedens, based on the fact that they can hit them with shock damage. Now, of course, if he's taken fire shock resistance, then they won't. But, you know, we can but try. You may also want to grab just Evocation 2 for Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt does 14 armor negating damage. It's great at just sniping people. If you have a whole bunch of Astropelagists spamming Lightning Bolt, they can do that for a long time, and they can take out enemy units pretty effectively. You can get Sulfur Haze out with Startsi. You can't have many Startsi early on, but 2 or 3 Startsi with 4 Communion Slaves can effectively throw down a lot of Sulfur Haze, and because of the way clouds work now, where they technically tick 3 times per round, Sulfur Haze is actually very damaging, because... Okay, so let me back up a little bit. Clouds. I don't know that I've talked about this in detail before. Cloud spells work differently now. They tick 3 times per round for 1/3 of their listed damage, but the listed damage here is 1, and they always tick for a minimum of 1 damage. And that's armor negating, so then it gets a DRN on top of that. So, that being so, Sulfur Haze in particular, as opposed to most clouds that have above 1 in damage rating, actually is not reduced in damage by ticking 3 times for 1/3 the damage, because it all rounds back to 1. So Sulfur Haze just became 3 times as powerful like 2 patches ago for no reason. That being so, it does randomly either fire or poison damage, both armor negating. It lingers for 4 rounds. It has a pretty wide area of effect, and it also does, assuming it hits, if it hits you, it then also does a bunch of armor negating fatigue damage. So it's pretty crazy. If you can lock somebody into a Sulfur Haze cloud for like 2 or 3 rounds, they'll probably die, assuming they're like a basic unit. And it ignores defense because it's an area of effect. You can't dodge it, it just hits you. So, Sulfur Haze, if it's a little bit later on and you've got some Startsi out, Sulfur Haze can be very useful. Lightning Bolt can be very useful just from Astropelagists. This also gives you Rain in case you start next to Abyssia and need to say fuck you, Abyssia. Although you actually can't cast Rain, you don't have any national water mages. So, you know, don't worry about that too much. Alteration. If you go down Alteration 2 to get Earth Meld, that can be very, very clutch against some people. I'm thinking particularly of Pangea, of Gath, anyone else who has a really scary Earthbound Sacred unit that you have to stop in the early game. Earth Meld can be very, very useful against those guys. Enchantment, I would say, should not be your first goal. You will want enchantment pretty quickly for Pale Riders, but not right at first. And Horde of Skeletons. Yeah, Horde of Skeletons, not Pale Riders, ignore that, Horde of Skeletons. Because it's not going to save you in the very, very early game. What'll save you early on, Conjuration, Evocation, potentially Alteration. You'll want to get Construction 4 early on to get Sanguine Dowsing Rods. But only after you first kind of secured your existence by pushing up to, like, Evocation and or Conjuration 5. Evocation 5, once you got Lightning Bolt, that'll be kind of your really early game defense. But you will want to push up to Alteration 5 in order to get Thunderstrike and Storm, and Gifts from Heaven, and Falling Fires, and Orb Lightning. Basically, you can cast almost all of these spells. You can't cast Falling Frost, you can't cast Poison Cloud or Healing Mists. You can cast Shadow Blast out of communions. You can cast Storm, Orb Lightning, Falling Fires, Earthquake, Gifts from Heaven. Don't ever cast Earthquake unless you're very, very well prepared, by the way. It destroys your communions of old men. But you've got just a ton of options. Evocation, Conjuration, Alteration, Enchantment, Thaumaturgy. You want Thaumaturgy 1 real early, probably first thing to get the communion spells. And then you might as well get level 2 for Mind Burn, because, I mean, it doesn't miss. It's precision 100, so it almost never misses unless you're at absolute max range. And it's armor negating damage, it just has an MR check on it. So, you know, might be useful. There's lots of options, but your first goal really has to be, as I said, you see your neighbors, you determine which school of magic is likeliest to help you survive. My money is on Conjuration and Evocation early on. You'll want Thaumaturgy level 2, so those 3, it's going to be like Thaumaturgy 2, Evocation 2, Conjuration 5. Or Alteration 2. And then one of these up to 5. After you've got that, probably around turn, I don't know, your research is fast as Bogarus, so probably like turn 20 or so, once you've got your first 5. 18, 20, something like that. After that, you'll want Construction 4, you'll want Enchantment 5. You're eventually going to want everything at really high levels. But at some point, you're going to make a hard left turn into blood magic and start summoning demons to replace your troops, which will be an instant upgrade. And once you've done that, then you might be in pretty good shape. So, I hope this has been a useful discussion. Bogarus is a very interesting nation to play. They can be very powerful, but you have to survive to get to the point where their power starts to increase. And it takes a little doing. If you happen to land next to a Rush nation as Bogarus, you can pretty much just put your head between your legs and kiss your butt goodbye. Because any Rush nation with half a brain is going to rush Bogarus. Like, the best situation for you would be you land on one side of Raga and Jomon lands on the other side, and you persuade them to attack Jomon instead. But to be honest, in that situation, they should attack you, because Jomon isn't nearly as scary in the late game as Bogarus is. So, eliminating Bogarus before turn 24 is, like, a valuable goal. You've accomplished something if you do that. And you've also gotten some sweet gem income. I mean, 2 astral per turn is pretty nice. In any case, thank you so much for watching. Thank you once again to Pendragon for his support of the channel. And I will see you all next time.